Welcome back to Novel Study. We are reading chapters 5, 6, and 7. The book Holes. We're trying to read about 15 pages a day for 15 days. Should bring us to the grand total of this book. I think it's around 225, 230 pages. All right. Last time we left off, Stanley was just arriving at Camp Green Lake, where he figured out there was no lake and nothing was green. So we'll see. See what's about to happen. The more I wear this hat, the more I like it. So I think I'm going to keep it on for all of Novel Study. All right, chapter 5. There were 6 large gray tents, and each one had a blanket, a black letter on it, A, B, C, D, or F. The first 5 tents were for the campers. The counselor slept in F. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Pendanski was his counselor. My name is easy to remember, said Mr. Pendanski as he shook hands with Stanley just outside the tent. 3 easy words: pen, dance, key. Mr. Sir returned to the office. Mr. Pendanski was younger than Mr. Sir and not nearly as scary looking. The top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald, but his face was covered in a thick, curly black beard. His nose was badly sunburned. Mr. Sir isn't really so bad, said Mr. Pendanski. He's just been in a bad mood ever since he quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule at Camp Green Lake: don't upset the warden. Stanley nodded, as if he understood. I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you, Mr. Pendanski said. I understand you've made some bad mistakes in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't mean you're a bad kid. Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try and tell his counselor that he was innocent. He figured that everyone probably said that. He didn't want Mr. Pendanski to think he had a bad attitude. I'm going to help you turn your life around, said his counselor. But you're going to have to help too. Can I count on your help? Yes, sir, Stanley said. Mr. Pendanski said, Good, and patted Stanley on the back. 2 boys, each carrying a shovel, were coming across the compound. Mr. Pendanski called to them, Rex, Alan, I want you to come say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team. The boys glanced warily at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat, and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and the other black. What happened to Barf Bag? Asked the black kid. Lewis is still in the hospital, Mr. Pendanski said. He won't be returning. He told the boys to come shake Stanley's hand and introduce himself. Like gentlemen. Hi, the white kid grunted. That's Alan, Mr. Pendanski said. My name's not Alan, the boy said. It's Squid, and that's X-Ray. Hey, said X-Ray. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty that Stanley wondered how he could see out of them. Mr. Pendanski told Alan to go to the rec hall and bring the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led them inside the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet from the one next to it. Which was Lewis's cot? Mr. Pendanski asked. Barf Bag slept here, said X-Ray, kicking at one of the beds. All right, Stanley, that'll be yours, said Mr. Pendanski. Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had been used by somebody called Barf Bag. 7 crates were stacked in 2 piles at one side of the tent. The open end of the crates faced outward. Stanley put his backpack, change of clothes, and a towel in what used to be Barf Bag's crate. It was at the bottom of the stack that had 3 in it. Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first 3 were introduced by Mr. Pendanski as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. They all have nicknames, explained Mr. Pendanski. However, I prefer to use the names that their parents gave them. The names that society will recognize by them when they return to become useful and hardworking members of society. It ain't just a nickname, X-Ray told Mr. Pendanski. He tapped the rim of his glasses. I can see inside you, Mom. You've got a big fat heart. The last boy didn't have a real name, or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Pendanski and X-Ray called him Zero. You know why his name's Zero? Asked Mr. Pendanski. Because there's nothing inside his head. He smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulders. Zero said nothing. And that's Mom, a boy said. Mr. Pendanski smiled at him. If it makes you feel better to call me Mom, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom. He turned to Stanley. If you have questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore? I'm depending on you. Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain about the need to keep their home sanitary. You're all new here once, said Mr. Pendanski, and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked at the ground. Mr. Podansky left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty he felt as if he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. Hey, Theodore, he said, going after him. Do you know where I can fill my canteen? Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by his collar. My name is not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit. He threw Stanley to the ground. Stanley stared up at him, terrified. There's a water spigot on the wall of the shower stall. Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. As he watched the boy turn and walk away, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone would want to be called Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little bit better about having to sleep in a cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. Maybe it was a term of respect. That's the end of chapter 5. On to chapter 6 now. Stanley took a shower, if you could call it that, ate dinner, if you could call it that, and went to bed, if you could call his smelly and scratchy cot a bed. Because of the scarcity of water, each camper was only allowed a 4-minute shower. It took Stanley nearly that long to get used to the cold water. There was no knob for hot water. He kept stepping into and then jumping back from the spray until the water shut off automatically. He never managed to use his bar of soap, which was just as well, because he wouldn't have time to rinse off the suds. Dinner was some kind of stewed meat and vegetables. The meat was brown and the vegetables had once been green. Everything tasted pretty much the same. He ate it all and used a slice of white bread to mop up the juice. Stanley had never been one to leave food on his plate, no matter how it tasted. What do you do? One of the campers asked him. At first, Stanley didn't know what he meant. They sent you here for a reason. Oh, he realized, I stole a pair of sneakers. The other boys thought that was funny. Stanley wasn't sure why. Maybe because their crimes were a lot worse than stealing shoes. From a store, or were they on someone's feet? Asked Squid. Neither, Stanley answered. They belonged to Clyde Livingston. Nobody believed him. Sweet feet, said X-Ray. Yeah, right. No way, said Squid. Now, as Stanley lay on his cot, he thought it was kind of funny in a way. Nobody had believed him when he said he was innocent. Now, when he said he stole them, nobody believed him either. Clyde Sweet Feet Livingston was a famous baseball player. He led the American League in stolen bases over the last 3 years. He was the only player in history to ever hit 4 triples in one game. Stanley had a poster of him hanging on the wall of his bedroom. He used to have the poster anyway. He didn't know where it was now. It had been taken by police and was used as evidence of his guilt in the courtroom. Clyde Livingston also came to court. In spite of everything, when Stanley found out that Sweet Feet was going to be there, he was actually excited about the prospect of meeting his hero. Clyde Livingston testified that they were his sneakers and he had donated them to help raise money for the homeless shelter. He couldn't imagine what kind of horrible person would steal from homeless children. That was the worst part for Stanley. His hero thought he was a no-good, dirty, rotten thief. As Stanley tried to turn over on his cot, he was afraid it was going to collapse under all his weight. He barely fit in it. When he finally managed to roll over on his stomach, the smell was so bad that he had to turn over again and try sleeping on his back. The cot smelled like sour milk. Though it was night, the air was still very warm. Armpit was snoring 2 cots away. Back at school, a bully named Derek Doon used to torment Stanley. The teachers never took Stanley's complaints seriously because Derek was so much smaller than Stanley. Some teachers even seemed to find it amusing that a little kid like Derek could pick on someone as big as Stanley. On the day Stanley was arrested, Derek had taken Stanley's notebook and, after a long game of come and get it, finally dropped it in the toilet in the boys' restroom. By the time Stanley retrieved it, he had missed the bus and had to walk home. It was while he was walking home carrying his wet notebook with the prospect of having to copy the rune pages that his sneakers fell from the sky. I was walking home and the sneakers fell from the sky, he had told the judge. One hit me on the head. It had hurt, too. They hadn't exactly fallen from the sky. He had just been walked out from under a freeway overpass when the shoe hit him on the head. Stanley took it as some kind of sign. His father had been trying to figure out a way to recycle old sneakers, and suddenly a pair of sneakers fell on top of him, seemingly out of nowhere, like a gift from God. Naturally, he had no way of knowing they belonged to Clyde Livingston. In fact, the shoes were anything but sweet. Whoever had worn them had a bad case of foot odor. Stanley couldn't help but think that there was something special about the shoes, that they would somehow provide a key to his father's invention. It was too much of a coincidence to be a mere accident. Stanley had felt like he was holding Destiny's shoes. He ran. Thinking back now, he wasn't sure why he ran. Maybe he was in a hurry to bring the shoes to his father, or maybe he was trying to run from his miserable and humiliating day at school. A patrol car pulled alongside him. A policeman asked him why he was running. Then he took the shoes and made a call on his radio. Shortly thereafter, Stanley was arrested. It turned out the sneakers had been stolen from his display at the homeless shelter. That evening, rich people were going to come to the shelter and pay $100 to eat the food that poor people eat every day for free. Clyde Livingston, who had once lived at the shelter when he was younger, was going to speak and sign autographs. His shoes would be auctioned, and it would be expected they would sell for over $5,000. All the money would go to help the homeless. Because of the baseball schedule, Stanley's trial was delayed several months. His parents could afford a lawyer. "You don't need a lawyer," his mother had said. "Just tell the truth." Stanley told the truth, but perhaps it would have been better if he lied a little. He could have said he found the shoes in the street. No one believed they fell from the sky. It wasn't destiny, he realized. It was his no-good, dirty, rotten pig stealing great-great-grandfather. The judge called Stanley's crime despicable. The shoes were valued at over $5,000. It was money that would provide food and shelter for the homeless, and you stole that from them, just so you could have a souvenir. The judge said that there was an opening at Camp Green Lake, and he suggested that the discipline of the camp might improve Stanley's character. It was either that or jail. Stanley's parents asked if they could have some time to figure out more about Camp Green Lake, but the judge advised them to make a quick decision. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. All right, that was the end of chapter 6. On to chapter 7. Take a little drink here. Chapter 7 is a little bit of a longer one. That's all right. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 7. The shovel felt heavy in Stanley's soft, fleshy hands. He tried to jam it into the earth, but the blade banged against the ground and bounced off without making a dent. The vibrations ran up the shaft of the shovel and into Stanley's wrist, making his bones rattle. It was still dark. The only light came from the moon and the stars, more stars than Stanley had ever seen before. It seemed he had only just gone to sleep when Mr. Pendanski came in and woke everyone up. Using all his might, he brought the shovel back down onto the dry lake bed. The force stung his hands but made no impression on the earth. He wondered if he had a defective shovel. He glanced at Zero about 15 feet away, who had scooped out a shovel full of dirt and dumped it on a pile that was already almost a foot tall. For breakfast, they had been served some kind of lukewarm cereal. The best part was the orange juice. They each got a pint carton. The cereal actually didn't taste too bad, but it had smelled just like his cot. Then they filled their canteens, got their shovels, and were marched out across the lake. Each group was assigned a different area. The shovels were kept in a shed near the showers. They all looked the same to Stanley, although X-Ray had his own special shovel, which no one else was allowed to use. X-Ray claimed it was shorter than the others, but if it was only by a fraction of an inch. The shovels were 5 feet long from the tip of the steel blade to the end of the wooden shaft. Stanley's hole would have to be as deep as his shovel, and he'd have to be able to lay that shovel flat across the bottom in any direction. That was why X-Ray wanted the shortest shovel. The lake was so full of holes and mounds that reminded Stanley of pictures he'd seen on the moon. "If you find anything interesting or unusual," Mr. Pendanski had told him, "you should report it to either me or Mr. Sir when we come around with the water truck. If the warden likes what you found, you'll get the rest of the day off." "What are we supposed to be looking for?" Stanley asked him. "You're not looking for anything. You're digging to build character. It's just that if you do find anything, the warden will like to know about it." He glanced helplessly at his shovel. It wasn't defective. He was defective. He noticed a thin crack in the ground. He placed the point of his shovel on top of it, then jumped on the back of the blade with both feet. The shovel sank a few inches into the packed earth. He smiled. For once in his life, it paid to be overweight. He leaned on the shaft and pried up his first shovelful of dirt, then dumped it off to the side. Only 10 million more to go, he thought, then placed the shovel back in the crack and jumped on it again. He unearthed several shovelfuls of dirt in this manner, before it occurred to him that he was dumping his dirt within the perimeter of the hole. He laid his shovel flat on the ground and marked where the edges of the hole would be. 5 feet was awfully wide. He moved the dirt he had already dug out past this mark. He took a drink from his canteen. 5 feet would be awfully deep, too. The digging got easier after a while. The ground was hardest at the surface, where the sun had baked a crust about 8 inches deep. Beneath that, the earth was looser, but by the time Stanley broke the crust, a blister had formed in the middle of his right thumb, and it hurt to hold the shovel. Stanley's great-great-grandfather was named Ilya Yelnats. He was born in Latvia. When he was 15 years old, he fell in love with Mira Menke. He didn't know he was Stanley's great-great-grandfather. Myra Menke was 14. She would turn 15 in 2 months, at which time her father had decided she should be married. Elia went to her father and asked for her hand, but so did Igor Barkov, the pig farmer. Igor was 57 years old. He had a red nose and fat, puffy cheeks. I will trade you my fattest pig for your daughter, Igor offered. And what have you got? Mira's father asked Elia. A heart full of love, said Elia. I'd rather have a fat pig, said Mira's father. Desperate, Elia wanted to see Madame Zeroni, an old Egyptian woman who lived on the edge of town. He had become friends with her, though she was quite a bit older than him. She was even older than Igor Barkov. The other boys of his village liked to mud wrestle. Elia preferred visiting Madame Zeroni and listening to her many stories. Madame Zeroni had a dark skin and a very wide mouth. When she looked at you, her eyes seemed to expand, and you felt like she was looking right through you. Elia, what's wrong? She asked, before he even told her he was upset. She was sitting in a homemade wheelchair. She had no left foot. Her legs stopped at her ankle. I'm in love with Mira Menke, Elia confessed. But Igor Barkov had offered to trade his fattest pig for her. I can't compete with that. Good, said Madame Zeroni. You're too young to get married. You've got your whole life ahead of you. But I love Mira. Mira's head is as empty as a flower pot. But she's beautiful. So is a flower pot. Can she push a plow? Can she milk a goat? No, she is too delicate. Can she have an intelligent conversation? No, she is silly and foolish. Will she ever take care of you when you are sick? No, she is spoiled and will only want to take care of her. So she is beautiful. So what? Madame Zeroni spat on the dirt. She told Elia that she should go to America. Like my son, that's where your future lies, not with Mira Menke. But Elia would hear none of that. He was 15 and all he could see was Mira's shallow beauty. Madame Zeroni hated to see Elia so forlorn. Against her better judgment, she agreed to help him. It just so happens my sow gave birth to a litter of piglets yesterday, she said. There is one little runt whom she won't suckle. You may have him. He would die anyway. Madame Zeroni led Elia around the back of her house where she kept her pigs. Elia took the tiny piglet, but he didn't see what good it would do him. It wasn't much bigger than a rat. He'll grow, Madame Zeroni assured him. Do you see that mountain on the edge of the forest? Yes, said Elia. On the top of the mountain, there is a stream where the water runs uphill. You must carry the piglet every day to the top of the mountain and let it drink from the stream. As it drinks, you are to sing to him. She taught Elia a special song to sing to the pig. On the day of Mira's 15th birthday, you should carry the pig up the mountain for the last time. Then take it directly to Mira's father. It will be fatter than any of Igor's pigs. If it's that big and fat, asked Elia, how will I be able to carry up the mountain? The piglet is not too heavy for you now, is it? Asked Madame Zeroni. Of course not, said Elia. Do you think it will be heavier for you tomorrow? No. Every day you will carry up the pig up the mountain. It will get a little bit bigger, but you will get a little stronger. After you give the pig to Mira's father, I want you to do one more thing for me. Anything, said Elia. I want you to carry me up the mountain. I want to drink from the stream, and I want you to sing the song to me. Elia promised he would. Madame Zeroni warned that if he failed to do this, he and his descendants would be doomed for all of eternity. At that time, Elia thought nothing of the curse. He was just a 15-year-old kid, and eternity didn't seem much longer than a week from Tuesday. Besides, he liked Madame Zeroni and would be glad to carry her up the mountain. He would have done it right then and there, but he wasn't strong enough. Stanley was still digging. His hole was about 3 feet deep, but only in the center. It sloped upwards to the edges. The sun had only come up over the horizon, but he could already feel its hot rays against his face. As he reached down to pick up his canteen, he felt a sudden rush of dizziness and put his hands on his knees to steady himself. For a moment, he felt he was afraid he was going to throw up, but the moment passed. He drank the last drop of water from his canteen. He had blisters on every one of his fingers and one in the center of each palm. Everyone's hole was a lot deeper than his. He couldn't actually see their holes, but could tell by the size of their dirt piles. He saw a cloud moving across the wasteland and noticed that the other boys had stopped digging and were watching too. The dirt cloud moved closer, and he could see that it trailed behind a red pickup truck. The truck stopped near where they were digging. The boys lined up behind it. X-ray in front, Zero at the rear. Stanley got in line behind Zero. Mr. Surrey filled each of their canteens from a tank of water on the bed of the pickup. As he took Stanley's canteen from him, he said, "This isn't the Girl Scouts, is it?" Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. Mr. Sears followed Stanley back to his hole to see how he was doing. You better get with it, he said, or else you're going to be digging in the hottest part of the day. He popped some sunflower seeds to his mouth, deftly removed the shells from his teeth, and spat them into Stanley's hole. Back to the past. Every day, Elijah carried the little piglet up the mountain and sang to it as it drank from the stream. As the pig grew fatter, Elijah grew stronger. On the day of Mira's 15th birthday, Elijah's pig weighed over 50 stones. Ma'am Zeroni had told him to carry up the mountain on that day as well, but Elijah didn't want to present himself to Mira smelling like a pig. Instead, he took a bath. It was his second bath in less than a week. Then he led the pig to Mira's. Igor Barkov was there with the pig as well. These are the two finest pigs I've ever seen, Mira's father declared. He was also impressed with Elijah, who seemed to have grown bigger and stronger in the last 2 months. I used to think you were a good-for-nothing book reader, he said, but now I see now you could be an excellent mud wrestler. May I marry your daughter? Elijah boldly asked. First, I must weigh the pigs. At last, poor Elijah should have carried his pig up the mountain one last time. The two pigs weighed exactly the same. Stanley's blisters had ripped open and new blisters for him. He kept changing his grip on the shovel to try to avoid the pain. Finally, he removed his cap and held it between the shaft of his shovel and his raw hands. This helped, but digging was harder because the cap would slip inside. The sun beat down on his unprotected head and neck. Though he tried to convince himself otherwise, he'd been aware for a while that his piles of dirt were too close to the hole. The piles were outside his 5-foot circle, but he could see that he was going to run out of room. Still, he pretended otherwise and kept adding more dirt to the piles. Piles that he would eventually have to move. The problem was that when the dirt was on the ground, it was compacted. It expanded when it was excavated. The piles were a lot bigger than his hole was deep. It was either now or later. Reluctantly, he climbed up out of his hole and once again dug his shovel into his previously dug dirt. Mira's father got down on his hands and knees and closely examined each pig, tail to snout. Those are two of the finest pigs I've ever seen, he said at last. How am I to decide? I only have one daughter. Why not let Mira decide, suggested Elijah. That's preposterous, exclaimed Igor, expelling saliva as he spoke. Mira is just an empty-headed girl, said her father. How can she possibly decide when I, her father, can't? She knows how she feels in her heart, said Elijah. Mira's father rubbed his chin. Then he laughed and said, Why not? He slapped Elijah on the back. It doesn't matter to me. A pig is a pig. He summoned his daughter. Elijah blushed when Mira entered the room. Good afternoon, Mira, he said. She looked at him. You're Elijah, right? She asked. Mira, said her father. Elijah and Igor have each offered a pig for your hand in marriage. It doesn't matter to me. A pig is a pig, so I will let you make the choice. Whom do you wish to marry? Mira looked confused. You want me to decide? That's right, my blossom, said her father. Gee, I don't know, said Mira. Which pig weighs more? They both weigh the same, said her father. Golly, said Mira. I guess I choose Elijah. Nah, Igor. No, Elijah. Nah, Igor. Oh, I know. I think of a number between 1 and 10. I'll marry whoever guesses the closest number. Okay, I'm ready. 10, guessed Igor. Elijah said nothing. Elijah, said Mira. What number do you guess? Elijah didn't pick a number. Marry Igor, he muttered. You can keep my pig as a wedding present. The next time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendansky, who also brought sack lunches. Stanley sat with his back against a pile of dirt and ate. He had a bologna sandwich, potato chips, and a large chocolate chip cookie. How you doing? Asked Magnet. Not real good, said Stanley. Well, the first hole's the hardest, Magnet said. Stanley took a long, deep breath. He couldn't afford to dawdle. He was way behind the others, and the sun just kept getting hotter. It wasn't even noon yet, but he didn't know if he had the strength to stand up. He thought about quitting. He wondered what they would do to him. What could they do to him? His clothes were soaked with sweat. In school, he had learned that sweating was good for you. It was nature's way of keeping you cool. So why was he so hot? Using a shovel for support, he managed to get to his feet. Where are we supposed to go to the bathroom? He asked Magnet. Magnet gestured with his arms to the great expanse around him. Pick a hole, any hole, he said. Stanley staggered across the lake, almost falling over a dirt pile. Behind him, he heard Magnet say, but first make sure there's nothing living in it. After leaving Mira's house, Elijah wandered aimlessly through the town until he found himself down by the wharf. He sat on the edge of a pier and stared down into the cold, black water. He could not understand how Mira had trouble deciding between him and Igor. He thought she loved him. Even if she didn't love him, couldn't she see what a foul person Igor was? It was like Madame Zeroni had said. Her head was as empty as a flower pot. Some men were gathering on another dock, and he went to see what was going on. A sign read, "Deck hands wanted, free passage to America." He had no sailing experience, but the ship's captain signed him aboard. The captain could see that Elia was a man of great strength. Not everybody could carry a full-grown pig up the side of a mountain. It was until the ship had cleared the harbor and was heading out across the Atlantic that suddenly remembered his promise to carry Madame Zeroni up the mountain. He felt terrible. He wasn't afraid of the curse. He thought that was a lot of nonsense. He felt bad because he knew Madame Zeroni had wanted to drink from the stream before she died. Zero was the smallest kid in Group D, but he was the first one to finish digging. "You're finished?" Stanley asked nervously. Zero said nothing. Stanley walked to Zero's hole and watched him measure it with a shovel. The top of his hole was a perfect circle and the sides were smooth and steep. Now one dirt clod more than necessary had been removed from the earth. Zero pulled himself up to the surface. He didn't even smile. He looked down at his perfectly dug hole, spat in it, then turned and headed back to the camp compound. "Zero's one weird dude," said Zigzag. Stanley would have laughed, but he didn't have the strength. Zigzag had to be the weirdest dude Stanley had ever seen. He had a long, skinny neck and a big round head with a wild, frizzy blonde hair that stuck out in all directions. His head seemed bob up and down his neck like it was on a spring. Armpit was the second one to finish digging. He also spat into his hole before heading back to the camp compound. One by one, Stanley watched each one of the boys spit into his hole and return to the camp compound. Stanley kept digging. His hole was almost up to his shoulders, although it was hard to tell exactly where ground level was because his dirt piles completely surrounded the hole. The deeper he got, the harder it was to raise the dirt up out of the hole. Once again, he realized he was going to have to move the piles. His cap was stained with blood from his hands. He felt like he was digging his own grave. In America, Elia learned to speak English. He fell in love with a woman named Sarah Miller. She could push a plow, milk a goat, and most importantly, think for herself. She and Elia often stayed up half the night talking and laughing together. Their life was not easy. Elia worked hard, but bad luck seemed to follow him everywhere. He always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He remembered Madame Zeroni telling him that she had a son in America. Elia was forever looking for him. He'd walked up to complete strangers and asked if they knew someone named Zeroni, or if ever heard of someone named Zeroni. No one did. Elia wasn't sure what do you do if you ever found Madame Zeroni's son anyway. Carry up a mountain and sing the pig lullaby to him? After his barn was struck by lightning for the third time, he told Sarah about his broken promise to Madame Zeroni. "I'm worse than a pig thief," he said. "You should leave me and find someone who isn't cursed." "I'm not leaving you," said Sarah, "but I want you to do one thing for me." "Anything," said Elia. Sarah smiled. "Sing me the pig lullaby." He sang it for her. Her eyes sparkled. "That's so pretty. What does it mean?" Elia tried his best to translate it from Latvian into English, but it wasn't the same. "It rhymes in Latvian," he told her. "I could tell," said Sarah. A year later, the child was born. Stanley named him Stanley because she noticed that Stanley was yelled at spelled backwards. Sarah changed the words of the pig lullaby so that they rhymed, and every night she sang it to little Stanley. If only, the woodpecker sighs. The bark on the tree was as soft as the skies. While the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, crying to the moon, if only, if only. Stanley's hole was as deep as his shovel, but not quite wide enough for on the bottom. He grimaced as he sliced off a chunk of dirt, then raised it up and flung it onto a pile. He laid his shovel back down at the bottom of his hole, and to his surprise, it fit. He rotated and only had to chip off a few chunks of dirt here and there before he could lie flat across his hole in every direction. He heard the water truck approaching and felt a strange sense of pride to be able to show to Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski that he had dug his first hole. He put his hands on his rim and tried to pull himself up. He couldn't do it. His arms were too weak to lift his heavy body. He used his legs to help, but just didn't have any strength. He was trapped in his hole. It was almost funny, but he wasn't in the mood to laugh. "Stanley," he heard Mr. Pendanski call. Using a shovel, he dug 2-foot holes into the wall. He climbed out to see Mr. Pendanski walk out of him. over to him. I was afraid you fainted, Mr. Pinansky said. You wouldn't have been the first. I'm finished, Stanley said, putting his blood-spotted cap back on his head. All right, said Mr. Pinansky, raising his hand for a high five, but Stanley ignored it. He didn't have the strength. Mr. Pinansky lowered his head and looked down at Stanley. Soul. Well done, he said. You want to ride back? Stanley shook his head. I'll walk. Mr. Pinansky climbed onto the truck without filling Stanley's canteen. Stanley waited for him to drive away and then took another look at his hole. He knew it was nothing to be proud of, but he felt proud nonetheless. He sucked up his last bit of saliva and spat. All right, that is the end of chapter 5, 6, and 7. Next time we will probably read 8 for sure. 8's like a page long. We'll read 8, 9, and 10, and 11 because they're all about a few pages. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys on Zoom, and thanks for stopping by.